Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 3 of Brothers on the Board, the podcast where we help teachers find peace and fulfillment in their careers. My name's John. This is my brother Wes. And for those of you who are tuning in for the first time, we are both middle school teachers with varying degrees of experience. And we just enjoy recording these conversations about these topics and hopefully helping some people and being mildly entertaining along the way. So, today's episode is something that I think is I feel like I start every time saying I think, but it's something that teachers struggle with. And it's something that we're going to continue to struggle with as we go through our careers, but it's encouraging student work ethic, which I think a lot of teachers would agree has gotten worse as years have went on. Wes, how you doing today, man?
I'm doing great. How about you?
Hey, I'm doing okay, right? It's Sunday night. I've got the Sunday scaries,
Oh, yeah.
but I'm gonna make it, right? I'm trying to find ways to get pumped about tomorrow, about what I'm gonna be doing. But yeah, no, I'm doing okay. As far as Sunday nights go, it's trash night, which that sucked. But other than that, I got to get that taken care of. But other than that, we're doing okay.
Yeah.
So what do you think? Do you think that? And I know that you and we haven't been in the field like as long as like our dad had, where he was like 30 years. But do you think that student work ethic has gotten worse over the years, or is this just kind of one of those things where it just feels that way?
I definitely think that student work ethic, my experience actually has been a little bit different with it. I feel like I saw like a decline. Obviously, like pandemic played a big role, right?
Yeah,
Which I feel like every podcast and everything you hear, it's like it immediately goes to the pandemic. But it did play a massive role in really changed kind of the culture. We schools were out of person for a while, and it wasn't as demanding of work because like everyone was adjusting to it, and we were all learning how to do it.
sure.
So I feel like I saw a decline with that, but from my experience, actually, I've seen a little bit of an uptick in work ethic over the last 2 years in my school.
Okay.
So
In terms of the group that I have this year, and it kind of trickles, right? It goes from group to group, but I would agree that this year's group seems to have a bit of a better, maybe it's just we're recovering from the pandemic, where you're starting to see um, closing the gap a little bit. Maybe that's the case, but student work ethic is something that we're always going to be. It's always a battle that we're going to be fighting, right? Where you have those green kids, quote unquote, that is going to do it no matter what. You know the kids, right? Like you're going to assign the work. You could go like get McDonald's and shop for the day and not even be there, and they would get it done, right? They would get it done. There would be no problems. It's like you have those kids. Then you've got the those yellow kids, right? Those yellow kids. It's in the middle, and they just need that support. They need that push, right? They just you got to stay on them just a little bit, and then they'll be okay. Then you got the red kids, the red kids, the kids that the tier 3 kids, where it is an absolute struggle to get anything turned in. And you know the kids I'm talking about, right? Where you have to
absolutely.
get really creative to try to find ways to get work in, right?
Hmm.
So obviously today's episode is looking at different ways that we can hopefully continue to encourage these yellow kids, kind of push them up, move some of those into the green, and also try to grab as many of those red kids as humanly possible. And I think it's important to realize as a teacher, you're not going to get them all. I mean, it's not going to happen, right? You do the absolute best that you can. You walk that fine line between realizing that you can't be perfect and doing the absolute best that you can, right? Because I think there's a fine line between apathy and being like, can't get them anyway, and and actually doing your best, right? So, anyways, today's episode we're going to be looking at a few different ways that we can hopefully encourage students to do better in the classroom, or at least put more effort into it, right? So I was recently reading an article, and it was talking about work ethic amongst American students. And the author of this article claimed that a big reason that student work ethic has declined over the last 10, 20 years is because students now are more focused on short term satisfaction over long term benefits. Everyone wants that short dopamine burst. They want everything now, now, now. What do you think about that? Do you think that that's kind of the case with today's generation?
Yeah, I definitely think that, and I've been guilty of it. Like we were talking, me and some of my coworkers talking the other day, actually, just about this exact thing, and how we find it difficult to watch long fill videos like a full Netflix show. We find ourselves scrolling on like YouTube Shorts or Facebook shorts or any of those kinds of shorts or TikTok because like it's a lot easier, right? It's a lot quicker, and you're getting that hit of dopamine a lot faster. And I think that as a society, we have kind of moved that way to more quick dopamine. But I do think that like you can also adapt that to your classroom, though. Like while we're talking about it, but we'll get to that in a minute. So I'm getting ahead of myself. So
Sure, sure. So you can like try to cater to that, right? In certain ways, but yeah, we'll get to that. Um, I have noticed it, and this is weird, and this is a completely different discussion in a way. But I've had this conversation with other people who are, you and I are gamers. We play our video games, we love them. You know, I see it in video games, in the video games that students enjoy now versus the video games that you and I grew up playing. You see gaming companies that's moved towards this trend, and could it be that media, the change of media, has caused students to kind of work this way, or is it just that students now prefer this and media has adapted? You see what I'm saying?
mhm.
So like when we grew up, we played RuneScape, right? You're clicking the same rock for like the next year and a half to get like 2 levels, right? It's like experience per hour. I am going to cut this tree. And it's like, that level's not coming for months, but you're still okay doing it. You feel fulfillment. And today's kids, like, it's like, nope, I ain't playing that game, right? They need that matchmaking, that I'm playing these short 15-minute rounds and I either win or I lose, or I get points or I lose points. And they need that win or lose now mentality, right? So yeah, I think you see that a lot. So I do agree with that. To when you look across media and the way it's presented to students, I think that we see it being reflected in the way that they consume media.
Yeah, I completely agree. And just going off of actually our last episode, episode two, or no, sorry, episode one, our first episode that we're going to be releasing about um, uh, strategies,
Resetting expectations.
resetting
Yeah.
expectations. I talked about chunking those lessons and activities. And I think that that's another reason that it's very important that we put those activities small increments, right? So that it's not that attention span and that isn't too overwhelming to students. So I definitely think that's another reason to do that. So
Which, I mean, of course, we can continue to blame media and other things, but at the end of the day, they're also 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Like they're young, like for the most part. Obviously, you have high school teachers that have older kids, but I mean, even then, it's still, I think, is more beneficial to keep things in short bursts. So, anyways, we have asked each other to come up with 3 different ways in which we can hopefully encourage student work ethic. Now, for some of you who have been teaching a long time and are very experienced, and I'm sure most of the people viewing this, you probably will hear some of these and be like, well, yeah, I mean, of course. Just keep in mind that you'd be surprised how many new teachers or even teachers who have been in the field for a minute may look at this and say, oh, okay, that's a good idea. So, I mean, even if you take one of the 6 things away that's useful, and by all means, if there's anything that we don't mention here that you would love to mention, please, please, please put it in the comments, because we're all here learning together, and we would like to hear it as well. I think this is a topic that you're always looking for new ways to approach this and try to hopefully fight this battle, because that's ultimately what it is. So, Wes, as always, I'm giving you the floor first. give me your first way that we can hopefully encourage students to be a little more productive.
All right. So, my first way that we can encourage students is through incentives. Right. So, not all students are intrinsically motivated. We want all of our students to be intrinsically motivated and want them to be motivated for themselves. And we want to instill that motivation. But unfortunately, the truth of the matter is, some of us just like stuff, right? And some of us are going
Yeah.
to be motivated by things. And so, incentives are definitely a way to do that. And my school, we use PBIS, positive behavior intervention. Um, so we do what's called star tickets, and I've said this a few times now, but we give star tickets to students who are safe, tolerant, accountable, and respectful. But we also reward them for obviously when they're accountable. That's the big one on today's. We do it for a bunch of different reasons, but accountability. So when students complete work on time, when they go above and beyond on their assignments, things like that, they'll receive star tickets, and then they can use those at the Star Store every month. We have like some donations and stuff that we're able to get, and we have some different like fundraising opportunities and stuff to get rewards for students who are going above and beyond. And I think that is definitely a way to motivate even students who are when they're not doing anything, like you said, the ones that are what you would call the red students,
Yeah.
the ones that like when you walk into a classroom, they're probably going to have their head down, right, and they're not going to be doing a whole lot.
Or at
um,
least you're not surprised when they do, right?
yeah,
Like,
not
like
surprised.
okay,
um, so with that, those star tickets definitely motivate them. Whenever you say like, "Hey, I know it's tough, but if you work through this and you turn it in, I'll give you 2 star tickets." They really get motivated by that. So I think the first one for me is definitely incentives. I have them in my classroom as well as um, school wide. So you can do it in your own classroom. I've been known to have stores where as a reward for student work, they get their picture in a picture frame up on my wall for like student of the
yeah.
week and things like that. Um, so I definitely think incentives is one way.
Incentives is something that's kind of stood the test of time, right? It's something that we continue to do to try to push students. Do you think that it's possible to over incentivize things? Like, we have PBIS systems in our school as well, right? We have a thing we call 90% elite tickets, similar to your star tickets. The 90% elite is saying that you are part of the 90% who is always doing the right thing. Because ultimately that's what it is, right? We give 90% elite tickets. We do in our classroom, we have a PBIS reward system where we give points. It's literally, the app is called, I think, PBIS. We have Class Dojo that my coworker and I, my colleague and I, we operate that within the context of our class individually, right? You have so many different systems. Do you think it gets to a point though where they become a little desensitized to it, or that you're rewarding them for things that they should just do, right? Things that you know, oh, good job, you walked down the hallway instead of running, right? Oh, good job. You didn't slam the door on your way out, right? And I understand that we want to build those habits and we want to point those things out. But do you think that sometimes it can be a little ridiculous for rewarding people for doing things? Because I've heard this discussion brought up. Do you think it can be a little ridiculous rewarding people for the things that they should just do?
Yeah, I mean, I think that you can definitely overdo it, especially like we've had times where like students will turn in like, or we'll have like the most expensive thing in the star store is like 50 star tickets, and they'll turn in 1 star ticket that some like a teacher has written like times 50 on. And it's like
Oh,
they've complained before because they're like, why are star ticket prices so high now? And I'm like, inflation.
dude,
Star ticket
we have the same
inflation.
issue. We have the same issue. We were given like goods in our like class store, and we're having to like raise the prices on everything because it's like, oh man, by sixth bell, dude, we're out, right? So the kids are all like, they're all like, why is this? They'll call it dollars. They'll be like, why is a can of pop $70? And I'm like, because it's not dollars. It's a different currency. I mean, you know what? Let's look at it. It's yen. You know what? like you have to understand that certain currencies work in different ways, right? If you look at a currency like yen or pesos or whatever, where it's just a way more for an item, it's just the way the currency works. Or telling a student like, well, I was running out. It's supply and demand, dude.
Yeah,
It's going prices are going
it's
up.
going up. Yeah, and that's it's a great lesson in and of itself, but it definitely happens. So I definitely think like you can definitely oversaturate it and definitely do that. So we're pretty intentional about when we give them. We try to be at least, and it's not. It shouldn't, like we've always said, it shouldn't be for just like the small things, just like
Mhm.
turning in an assignment or something. But sometimes, when you're working with a student that just is refusing to do anything, you have to incentivize them in some way, So that
Well, you have to realize. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
that's okay. Not all students, have the same experiences, and so because of that, you have to differentiate not just instruction, but you also have to kind of see a differentiation there with incentives as well. So
Well, I mean, I think it's important to realize too that as teachers, you're not just teaching curriculum and content, and it's easy for us, maybe people who have been through the education system, who are raised a certain way, to think, well, in society, this is the way you behave, right? But for a lot of students, you're teaching them behavior, you're teaching them how to be a student because they don't know, and it's easy for us as teachers to see a kid misbehave and think that they're doing it in spite of you or for some other reason, when in reality they just don't know how to behave and have to be taught that, right? So I can see the argument both ways. Like, I can see, being over incentivizing students, but at the same time, for that student who every time they shut a door they slam it, right? That's a good way to hopefully try to break that habit, right? You want to point it out when the right thing is done. You want to point that out, right?
mhm.
All right. Yeah, that's a good one. Um, so moving on to my first one. And my first way of encouraging students is when you are giving them an assignment, when you're giving them something to do, I think it's important that you tell them why they are doing it. Why is this beneficial in some way, right? And let's be honest, in some cases, the curriculum that we're asked to teach can be difficult to explain to a 12-year-old why this is important, right? If you're a math teacher and you're trying to explain why calculus is something they may need, right? It may be difficult for a kid that's sitting there going, like, dude, I'm just going to do, XYZ for a living. Like, I'm never going to use that, right? It's difficult to explain those things. Or as an English teacher, me saying, oh, well, you need to understand how to provide evidence. Why is this important, right? You need to find ways to connect this to the real world. I think that that's extremely important so that they realize that, oh, okay, Mr. Howard's not giving this to me to keep me busy or because he can. He's doing it because he cares about me and he's giving me something that I will actually need in the future, right? Or something I'll need for, class, or something I'll need for, a class down the road, or anything to make them understand why you're giving it to them. And honestly, making sure that the things that you do give them are given for a reason, right? Like, I'm not just printing out a few worksheets today just because I just need something, right? I'm doing whatever it is that I'm doing it intentionally and I'm doing it for a reason. What are your thoughts?
I definitely agree with that. Like connecting what you're learning to like real life scenarios. Um, is definitely important. And, I think every teacher out there, everyone who's listening can relate to the age old question, why do I need to know this? Like we have all heard it. The
Yeah.
student raises their hand and you know it's coming.
Mhm.
Uh, And so sometimes you got to stretch to get
Yeah.
those connections, but you can make it happen.
It's like,
Why do you
why you
need
doing?
this?
Why? Yeah.
I taught a lesson, a unit last year, and in science we use what's called anchoring phenomena, and it was like a 6 week long lesson unit over air conditioning units, and I was like, by the end of it, I was like, you need it because everyone's gonna have an air conditioning unit at some point, like.
Do you want to be hot in the summer? Do you want to roast? If you want to roast, then don't pay
I was like,
attention.
I'm so tired of talking about air conditioners.
That was,
But yeah, I definitely think it's important. I think it's important again. Like all these things can come back to even us. Like as an adult, I don't do stuff that I don't have a reason for. Like I need to
mhm.
know the why for it too. Most of the time, obviously
Yeah,
sometimes there's like you got to do it, but like I want to know why I'm doing it. So
yeah. I mean, if your boss, your principal wants you to do something, I mean, you're going to question. I mean, you'll do it because your boss is asking you to. But at the end of the day, people will question as to why is it that they're being asked to do something, right?
mhm.
I mean, this is a natural human. It's funny how you talk about the air conditioners because now I'm sitting here thinking like, my kids, we talk about, claims and evidence. I know it's claims. A lot of people use claims, evidence, reasoning. We do a thing called two seek where you give a topic sentence, you provide evidence, you elaborate on it. You do all those things. And, you know, the thing that I'm always using in my class is like, if you were accused of a crime, right? If you were accused of a crime and were accusing someone else of a crime and you were providing evidence, right? You're like, this is the reason that he did it. It's this shoe, right? This shoe's the reason he did it. But then you don't talk to the jury as to why that shoe matters. If you don't elaborate on it, the jury's going to be like, okay, why does that shoe have anything to do with that? Like you have to elaborate on it, right? If you're teaching elaboration or if you're providing evidence. And now that you've mentioned the air conditioner, I'm thinking like, man, all my kids are think that they're going to get charged with a crime or something. Like that's, but it's just it's the easiest way to connect, claims and evidence and providing reasoning, right?
Yeah.
But also, obviously I'm joking for the most, but the thing is we find ways, like for example, if I'm saying, providing evidence, like what if you one of these days want to go ask your boss for a raise, right? You're going to provide evidence. You're going to say, well, I have performed this well. I have worked here this long. These other people are making this amount and they've been here X amount of years, or, whatever it is. Like you're going to want to be able to understand how to use evidence to get what you want in this world. Um, so, yeah, I think it's important that students understand why they're doing something, or at least why it's important. Okay, moving on now to your number two. What you
Yep.
got for me?
All right. So my number two uh, is going to be one that might be a little controversial, I think, but
Ooh.
making the classroom warm and inviting.
Mm.
You know,
Okay.
I believe that the first way to get someone motivated to do something is making them comfortable in the classroom. Uh,
Mhm.
I'm not going to want to work for you. I'm not going to, if I have a boss that was like always talking about the negative, always cold, and I wouldn't want to work for someone like that, right?
Yeah.
In the same sense that students aren't going to want to work for me unless I give them a space where they can, um, you know, speak their mind freely and can, feel comfortable enough to do that, to work and to complete the tasks. So I definitely think that is very important to build connections with students. Those relationships are very important because when a student, we all know, like when a student likes you and they want to do well, right? And
Yes.
for the most part, most students, I think, vast majority of students want to do well. Like even those red students
Yeah.
want to do well, but
Yeah.
they have repeatedly been in a cycle of negative comments, of failures over and over again to where they just
Mhm.
they don't think they can. And I
Yeah.
think as teachers, it's very important that it's our job to show those students they can. And it may be little successes, right? But you gotta
Mhm.
make sure that you are reinforcing any little positive thing you can. And I know there's going to be people that are going to be saying, and I welcome it. I can't wait for the comments down below, that
Bring it.
we can be a little too positive, right? Positive, toxic toxicity, right? But at the end of the day, I think it's the old saying, like, you catch more um
Flies
bees,
with
oh,
honey.
flies, yeah, with honey, right? You catch more flies with honey. It's true. And
Yeah.
I think that it's very important that we do that. What are your thoughts on that one?
Well, it's the age-old adage that, students don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. I guess it's kinda getting into the realm of that. And I think you also touch on this when you get into that sort of area. You're getting into that idea of, when students have other problems, they're not gonna focus on your work, right? If a student is, having trouble with somebody else in the classroom, right? Or they're having trouble with, you don't have a very positive relationship with you, or if they feel like throughout your lecture or your class they're going to get picked on by the person in their group, or whatever it is, um, then, or if they're afraid that every little time they mess up they're going to get yelled at, right? It makes it difficult to be productive, right? But yeah, I'm sure that there's a lot of people who, and here's the thing too, is it's really dependent on the teacher, right? I know teachers who can foster a warm environment, but still just they have that authoritarian sort of kind of feel. Like when you walk into the room, they produce just an aura of just you do what I tell you to do. Do you know what I mean? Like some teachers just have that.
Hmm.
Um, and for those teachers, and and if things just run like clockwork, it's like by all means do it. But and some of those teachers may not be like, well, I'm not in the business of giving hugs. Do the work. You know what I mean? But for some of those people, I guess that works. But um, I can tell you from my experience, for me at least, um, I am not. I am the biggest bunny in the world. Like I'm just a big, cuddly bunny who that no one's doing any work for me because they're scared of me. I promise you that is not happening, right? They do work for me because they know that I care about them and I want them to do well and all those things. It is not because they're like, oh man, Mr. Howard's going to get me today. It's not that. That is not going to be the case. So, different teachers, I guess, approach it different ways. But yeah, absolutely. I think it's important that, and I think most evaluation tools that principals use, like that is usually a category, right? Is a classroom warm, inviting, and has a what's a safe environment, safe structure, right? Yeah, definitely important.
Hmm.
Okay, my number two: give positive feedback. Okay, let me tell you, people. I'm going to tell you the story of George Eklund. This man. I love this man's class. When I was in college, I had a. Did you have Dr. Eklund when you were
I
there?
did not, no,
Oh man,
because he
you
was
missed out.
English, right?
He was creative writing, so a lot of people took him as like a gen
N-
ed.
No.
Okay, this dude had the unique ability to make you feel like you were the best writer in the world. You could have written garbage. And he would find a way to make it fantastic, right? So you would have one-on-ones with him, and we would come in. We had class in the library. He would always say things like, "I don't believe in the structure of walls. I don't like to be contained by walls." And the way this man spoke, like he was mesmerizing. Like you couldn't help but just listen to him. It's like he was incredible. So we would have class in the library, and you would have these one-on-ones with you, and you would come in and you would set your paper down and he'd read it and he'd be like, I see here how you're metaphorically talking about life's struggles and how things always come around. And you're like, yes, Yeah, that's exactly what I was doing, right? It may have had nothing to do with that, but it didn't matter. He was awesome at making you feel awesome. And I think that when you're giving feedback, and I will admit, and I think all teachers are guilty of this, is sometimes we don't give as much feedback as we should. We score things, but we don't give as much feedback as we should. Um, I remember when I was doing my student teaching, and for those of you who have not watched this, weirdly enough, Wes here was actually in my class when I was student teaching. So when I was student teaching, I was giving feedback on some assignments, and I remember one of the kids. I don't remember which one it was. They were like, "It just makes you feel so good, right? It's just like you're saying something nice about it." Okay, I get it. It may not be great, right? But you can find something good to say. You know what I mean? Don't just write a bunch of negative comments, right? Don't just take a paper and just tear it to shreds, because the next time you give an assignment, that kid's like, "Hey man, I ain't doing this again." Like it fosters a fear of failure, is what it does. Um, I remember when I was in college, another college story. I had a professor who I made a bad mistake through a paper, and I did it multiple, multiple, multiple times, enough to where there's really no excuse. And in the feedback, he wrote, "You called this, whatever it was. This is a stupid," in all caps, underlined multiple times, "mistake you made throughout the entire essay." And like that was the feedback they gave me, right? So like I think about that when I'm giving feedback to a student, where I'm like, man, you can't, that doesn't really accomplish a whole lot. I'm not saying don't point out mistakes. I'm saying find something good to say before you point out those mistakes. And then also, if they do it 5 times, you don't have to point it out 5 times, right? You can point it out once and then pull them aside. Hey, man, make sure you do this and this, right? You don't have to be a jerk about it. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think everyone at this point can start to see a pattern with me with positivity. So I agree. Find something. I mean, even if it's just like, hey, I'm glad you wrote 5 paragraphs. Right?
Mm-hmm.
They may not be good paragraphs. We may have some work to do, but we got to start. You know, um, no, you can find something. If a student does something, if they're working on something and attempting something, then they're giving you something, right? Like unless they turn it in
That's right.
completely blank, which in that case we're gonna have a conversation. But
Yeah.
like they're attempting it, like it may be the best they can do, and you're gonna have to dig deep for that. But I definitely agree. I think that it's very important that we all get a little positive feedback when we're putting work into it. I think sometimes as teachers we forget all the things we're asking of students. Like well, it's
Mhm.
just a 5 paragraph essay. Well, it's
Yeah.
just a 20 question test. Um, for these students, it's pretty difficult. Like that's not an easy thing to ask, and it's very important that they get some kind of positive thing when you're given all the feedback for sure.
I had a student the other day. He comes in. So our classes are in blocks. It's like we have 2 3 Bell's 2 3 for me is one class, right? It's an hour and a half. And this student showed up late to school, right? He shows up late to school. He's only there for third bell, so he misses the reading portion that we were doing. We'd been reading a book, and we we do an assignment based on that reading. So he comes in. He's a student that, you know, I know he's a good kid, and I know he has a lot of potential, but there's days where he struggles to get things done, right? But he comes in and sits down, and he's like, "Hey, what are we doing?" And I told him what we were doing. I was like, "Yeah, man." I was like, "I know you missed the reading, dude. Just here's a book. Go back and try to look through it and do the best you can with it, right?" So I go that evening, and I'm going through and I'm grading papers, and there's his, and it's done. And I was it's the first assignment of the quarter, so I'm pumped. I'm like, all right, let's go. My dude's got 100%, right? So I pull him out the next day in the hallway, and I'm like, hey, man, I just want to let you know I'm proud of you, dude. Like, you came in, you missed the reading, and you still got it done. That's awesome. So later that day, I hear him talking to another teacher in the hallway, and he's like, "Man, I'm having such a good day." He's like, "So and so told me that I did a good job in their class," and he pointed at me down the hallway and he said, "It started with him. He told me I did a good job." And it's moments like that where you're like, it makes it worth it, right? And like you just you feel good about it, right? So this is a kid I know has some struggles, has some problems at home, and yet you know it's just you added a bright spot to that kid's day, and then he added a bright spot to yours. So yeah, absolutely. Giving positive feedback, I think, is extremely, extremely important. So, your number three, hit me with it.
All right. So my number three um, is student choice.
Hmm.
Giving
That's a good
students
one.
options in your classroom, and I know it's difficult. Like, and we're teachers, and we talk about how we're balancing, juggling just a ton of balls all the time, and adding another ball of having to come up with an assignment in like multiple different medias and different fashions and different ways is sometimes just not going to happen. And I understand that completely. But if you can give student choice, you should, because when the students get to choose what they are doing, when they get to vote, like most of the time in my class, we will have a vote at least 2 or 3 times a week on what
Hmm.
they are doing, how they want to do it. Right? I mean, it may be a reading where we are we going to read with partners? Are we going to read as a group? We're going to read out loud, take turns, popcorn read, all that fun stuff. Um, or are we going to like break it up and half the group does half of it, the other half does the other half? We just do all kinds of different options. But when students really feel like they have a choice and feel like they have a say in how they are learning, they will um, perform better. They will give their all, because they decided this, right? They have ownership in it. It's not just some person telling them what to do now. So
Hmm.
I definitely think that that is a huge one when trying to get students, when you have like that group that just, and it's hard to give up sometimes. I know in years past, from my experience, I've had groups that I'm like, man, things aren't going well. I have a lot of students who aren't working, like a large group of them, and it's hard to be like, man, these kids aren't doing what they're supposed to do, so I'm going to give them choice.
Hmm.
It seems almost counterproductive in a way,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
it's not the case. They really do get ownership of it, and your green students are going to do it regardless. You know,
Yeah.
so
You know, when you have students that almost like when you have students or classes even, because some classes have a mentality, the whole class, right, where they will kind of fight tooth and nail no matter what you give them. I have found that there are some classes where if I give them an essay and it doesn't matter what the prompt is, right? They're going to complain about it. Typically, like you have those classes, right? Where this class, I know when I give them this prompt, when I give them this essay, they're going to complain about it. And what I have found is when you add choice, let's say I give 3 prompts and say choose which prompt you want to write about, right? Even if I were to give those 3 prompts individually, they would hate all 3 of them. But when it is given as a choice, you get much, much less pushback from my experience. It's shocking how when students feel as though they have a voice and they can, like you said, they can take ownership over what they're doing. It makes a big difference in getting things done. I do believe that, and that's actually something that, and my colleague, my coworker that I co-teach with, that's something that we've discussed is, and we have a fairly strict curriculum that we have to follow. But finding ways to embed in that curriculum student choice, I think, is important. So even if you are someone like me who has a curriculum that you follow, and I'm not saying it's scripted, it's just like these are kind of the assignments you're doing on these days for the most part. Um, you can still find ways to differentiate and add student choice to those lessons. Um, and I think that is a good segue into my number three, which is add variety to your delivery of your lessons. So try this. If you have students who are constantly up. You know, it's like the whack-a-mole student who is like, they get out of their seat and you're like, hey, take a seat. And they sit down. A couple of minutes later, they're back up. It's like, hey, sit down. And they sit back down. I mean, they can't help it. Like some students just they cannot stand it, right? For those students who struggle to get things done, add movement to your lessons. Add movement. Do stations. You know, do gallery walks. Do we did this really cool lesson fairly recently where we had students, the whole purpose was speaking and listening was the whole purpose of the lesson, which is a standard in English. And one student, there were groups of three. One student was drawing on a piece of paper. One student was called the gopher, and the gopher had to run between the person drawing and then the person who had the original image. And the person with the original image had to give them instructions on what the drawer should draw. So they would be like, you know, it's a circle near the top. They could only give shapes and lines. They couldn't say draw a hat, right? They couldn't say draw a turtle, right? They had to say like draw us a half circle, and then on the bottom of the half circle draw two squares. So the gopher is like running back and forth, and it's incredible how many students that you know when you see students struggling with kind of work where they have to sit still, the students that typically don't do so hot in that environment, you will see them do so much better when they're able to move. Um, you know, stations, even just you're working in this station for 5 minutes. Now, you know, the class is going to get up. We're going to rotate. You're going to move over to this group. Just giving them that ability to just get up and move for just a second, I think makes a big difference for a lot of students or a lot of classes, even. You know, you have those classes where there's more movement than other classes. Like for those classes, even, it works really, really well.
Yeah, yeah, I completely agree with that. And I've been known to even like be like, all right, you know, we do a lot of class discussions in science. We have what's called a driving question board that kind of drives what we're doing. It's supposed to be like student made and stuff. And so the other day, I had actually just like 2 or 3 days ago, we had to update the driving question board, and I was in there and I was doing it, and like I wasn't getting a lot of like participation. Students were kind of tired. We were coming off a winter break, and I was finally like, you know what? Like, why am I the one up here doing that? I was like, I need a volunteer who wants to lead the class. And as soon as I said I need a volunteer who wants to lead class, every single hand shot up. Like even my ones that like never do anything. Like, and I'm like, all right, we have a bunch of people who want to do it. I want to give everyone a fair opportunity. I was like, I'm going to do a random number generator. So I did a random number generator to see who leads the class, and it lands on the class clown of the class. I'm
Mm.
like, oh, this is going to be great. And he did fabulous. He led the class discussion, was very serious about it. And like sometimes they will shock you when you give them the opportunity to do something that's kind of out of the norm of the class, you know?
When students who when that class clown has an opportunity to be a leader, and a lot of times that's the case. A lot of times the class clown or quote unquote, you know, class clowns, the people we see as class clowns, a lot of times those kids are the leaders of the classroom in one way or another, right? And so you can either make it a positive experience. I saw one time we had a PD, a professional development, with a guy who talked about this, and he said that he was the class clown when he was in school, but he had one teacher who would let him greet everyone at the door when they came in, and then she would give him like the first 2 or 3 minutes to kind of start the class, or you know, tell a joke or something. He'd give him something, right? And that made all the difference for him, right? It gave him that attention that he was looking for. It gave him, because you know, students who want attention, they're going to get attention one way or another, whether it's up through positive means or negative means, and it's kind of up to you as the teacher or as the facilitator to find ways to give them that attention, to make sure that they're and because in some ways for a lot of those students that's one of their needs, and making sure that those needs are met in a way that's good for them and the rest of the class as well. So, all right, I think I think that's the last one, and hopefully for those of you who are listening, you have found some. some use of these suggestions. I understand that many people listening to this are teachers who have been teaching longer than I have and longer than Wes has, and you know all these things, and you may even know things that we don't know. And I would love for you to comment, share, give us suggestions. I would love to have things to use in my room that I don't currently do. But we thank you guys for listening. It means the world to us. If you are listening on YouTube, please consider going to that big, juicy red subscribe button and clicking it. And if you're on a podcast network, whatever that network may be, please consider subscribing there as well. We will see you next time for episode 4 of Brothers on the Board. Have a great week and see you next time.